Okay, welcome to the Destination Arete podcast. I'm David.
And I'm Mark, and we're building a community of creatives who work together to achieve creative excellence.
All right, and if you see this guy pop into screen, we're recording at home right now. Normally we're recording long distance, but people watching on video may see a small dog every few seconds. So you'll just say hi to Snickers there. But today is our annual Christmas episode. Mark, we've recorded a Christmas episode very faithfully. Mm-hmm. The podcast began its existence at the beginning of December, so Christmas was on our minds back in 2017. Do you remember any of the themes or stuff we discussed?
I know we did. I remember our Rankin Bass Christmas special pretty well. And then I can't remember, did we devote an entire episode to the Muppets or not?
Yes.
Okay.
Entire episode to the Muppets, an entire episode to Hallmark Christmas movies.
Yes.
And our disdain or lack thereof. Yes. And then an entire episode plus another entire episode to Klaus.
Oh, yeah. That was our two for one. Yeah.
That was fun. We really liked Klaus. We'll probably watch it again soon, hopefully this week. And then even back in 2017, we talked about Christmas books that our parents had for us.
Yes.
And then we also talked about the greatest story ever told, which is the story of Jesus coming, which leads me to today's topic, which is the Nativity Scene. As evidenced here behind us, I wanted to talk about the scene itself in art, in representational art, and even in modern art. We'll get there. Mm-hmm. But I thought it was just something that would be a good refresher for us because you're home now for the holidays, but how many nativity scenes maybe have you seen since December 1st? Can I put a number on it, or can you think of any specific ones?
Yeah. There's the one that's at the church that I go to in Florida, and it's like probably 3/4 life size, so the figures are pretty big. And then I went to a Christmas lights display, kind of like drive-through up near our parents' house, and that had like the outlined ones, and it had different things like that. And then we got to go to a garden kind of big property estate, kind of like I'm trying to think what would be an equivalent to it. What's that thing in North Carolina that
Biltmore?
The Biltmore. It's like the Biltmore of Alabama, and okay. It's about what you would think. But they had a really nice nativity there. All that to say. So yeah.
Cool. Yeah, where I work, there's a huge one that is twice life size out front.
Wow.
It's amazing. We should go buy it later this week. And then, of course, this is coming out on Christmas Day, so people are hearing this after Christmas, but I think it'll still be beneficial. Then there's one, we'll put some of them actually here on the screen for you guys if you're watching this episode on YouTube, but there's one in my front room that when I walk in my house, you probably saw it tonight when you came in. Yeah. There's one right next to us that we have in the living room. And my wife said that one is actually from her childhood. She brought that with her into our marriage, so that's nice. There's one down the street that's a cutout, kind of like this one behind me, where it's just wooden figures that are white. And then there's another one down the street that's that, but it has a light shining on it, so at night it shows up on their house.
Okay.
So it's like
on the roof?
No, on the side of the house. So the figures are cut out on the ground, and they're small, but there's a light in front of them, and behind them the shadows.
Oh, it's like a silhouette, like a shadow puppet kind of thing.
Yeah, exactly. So... and then there are a multitude. I went to a Christmas party of my pastor's house, and there were probably 18 nativity scenes between the ornaments, and they're kind of one of those people that don't put Jesus in the manger until Christmas Day.
I like those people.
Yeah,
those
so that's one of those things. But I just, it's so common that I wanted to kind of refresh our memory and our knowledge of it. So we can thank Byzantine artists. I don't know any of their names, but they set into motion the imagery that we know today, this idea of the nativity scene. And the earliest pictorial representations of Jesus' nativity come from graves in Rome and southern Gaul around, I want to say around 400 or 500 BC, so after Christ's birth, or after Christ's death. 4 or 500 AD, after Christ's death.
Oh, okay.
And then they also, they're later than the Adoration of the Magi, which actually showed up in the catacombs of Rome before this. So early Christians buried their dead, decorated the walls and the passages with art. Mm-hmm. And so they would show even the wise men coming to see Jesus, which is really cool. And something that was very interesting to me was the Magi are shown instead of 3, and I think it's because there's 3 gifts, gold, frankincense, and myrrh, and they're shown with the gifts like this, and they're moving towards Jesus, which is something that comes from art in Egypt, which is centuries and centuries before this time, like thousands of years. And in Egypt, people who were worshiping a king or a god would carry their gift and move in synchronization in the art, okay? So on the paintings, on the drawings, on the walls. So Christian artists in the later centuries after Jesus' death are recreating the birth of Christ, and they're using art styles and art ideas from the past to create I don't know. It was just really cool to see, like, these were not just people just like, what do you think they did? Oh, they brought their gifts to Jesus. No, this was people who had studied art styles and understood. They were artists, right? They weren't just doodlers, or kids drawing on the wall.
Right. And that's really cool to think about them using the things that we would be like, oh, the world, made that, but they're using them and redeeming them to decorate the walls. And your education has to come from somewhere,
Yes.
and Christianity was relatively new at the time, so it would make sense that they would pull, especially art, they didn't have like a Christian art tradition, and so they just pulled it from that. And that is really cool that they were able to honor those people in that way, that way that glorified God and His coming.
Yeah, I think the phrase is "steal like an artist."
Yes, I think so. I think we should write a book called it.
I think it's already been done. Maybe we'll make a movie.
Maybe we'll make the movie. We'll make Austin Kleon, if you know us, call us. We'll make the movie.
Yeah, hit us up. The earliest representations of the Nativity itself are very simple. So they usually are just baby Jesus, lightly wrapped, lying on the ground or near the ground in a manger or a trough, a feeding trough. But something interesting is that it's Jesus, and then there's an ox and a donkey. And even when Jesus' mother isn't there or Jesus' father isn't there, there's always an ox and a donkey. And let me put it this way, look behind you. This nativity scene has an ox and a donkey. It does not have a shepherd, it does not have a wise man, but it has baby Jesus, Mary and Joseph, an ox and a donkey, right? And there's even, when I was at that Christmas party I mentioned earlier, I found a nativity scene that only had Mary, Jesus, Joseph, an ox and a donkey. The slides that were used at church last week were a silhouette of a manger, Mary and Jesus, an ox and a donkey. And I wanted to ask you, what do you think that means? There's many options, but when you see a manger scene like this one or like another one with an ox and a donkey, what comes to your mind?
I always thought that it was like just trying to reinforce the idea that it was in a barn. Like that's like, okay, he was born in a place where animals were. That's the only significance I've had, and I've honestly not noticed. Like that's literally what I thought. That was just...
Right, and to me, that's always what I've thought too. Jesus was born in a barn. Of course, there would be barn animals there. Mm-hmm. But in reality, they are not mentioned in the gospel accounts, but they're confirmed by lots of theologians, and they're also confirmed by Old Testament scripture, such as Isaiah 1:3, the ox knoweth his owner, and the donkey his master's crib. And then also Habakkuk 3:2, in the midst of two beasts wilt thou be known. And so these two verses aren't necessarily speaking directly about Jesus Christ, the baby, but the imagery is something that Christian artists took and said, I'm going to put these in the nativity scene, and there's going to be an ox and a donkey, and the ox represents the Jewish people weighed down by the law from Moses, and the donkey represents the pagan people carrying the sin of idolatry. So donkeys usually would haul things, and oxen would pull things. Oh. And so, yeah, isn't that kind of cool?
That's so cool.
So when you see a nativity scene now, and you see an ox and a donkey, I mean, there's one over there that has an ox and a donkey. There's one in our living room that has an ox and a donkey. There's one here. And those are you'd think that sheep would be there because, the shepherds came to see Jesus, right? But it's not just because the people were trying to draw animals to put into a barn. It's because there's a tradition of nativity scenes passed down that says the ox represents the Jewish people and the donkey represents the idolatrous, pagan, like Gentiles.
Right. So even in our earliest versions or visions of the baby Jesus, we already see him coming to save both Jew and Gentile. That's super cool. Wow.
Mary often is only shown when the adoration of the Magi come, but then sometimes the shepherds started to be added in the 5th century. Mary actually became a stable figure. Like, I think they started to emphasize Mary more in the church, the Catholic Church tradition, so she became a stable figure. But then Joseph is a more variable element, and then when there's a building, it's usually just a very shoddy building, like a simple roof supported by posts. And we'll get to more of that later. Okay. Real quick, the word nativity most often includes 4 scenes. The one that we know with the birth of Christ, then there is the announcement of the shepherds scene, the adoration of the Magi, and the flight into Egypt. Now, there's actually 8 scenes that are considered nativity, but these are the 4 that would be most often represented when you're talking about. So you could have a nativity scene that was the wise men only, or you could have a nativity scene that was Jesus and Mary and Joseph running from the Herod's men that were coming. So I thought it was interesting that we've kind of boiled it down in popular culture to the birth of Christ, which is great. But yeah, those 4 scenes are what the nativity is, and we often just see the birth of Christ as the biggest one. But and something else that's interesting is Jesus was born in a cave, and that's kind of what the Bible indicates. But we often see, as stated here and as the other 2 in my house, as a shed, right? Mm-hmm. I don't know if you can think of any nativity scenes from our childhood that had sheds attached to them.
Yeah, there's one up at the house right now that has just like a stone backdrop, and then there's like a kind of a little roof over there, which was always fun. That was fun to play with.
And did you help Dad make a big one for outside?
Yeah, so we used to have just Mary and Joseph and the baby Jesus outside our house, and then one year, I don't know why, but we were like, I don't know if Dad was just like feeling the DIY, projects, but he was like, all right, we're gonna make a barn. And so it was super cool. We made like this little shed structure. It's just 3 posts and then 3 pieces of wood and then a barn roof, and it's a sloped roof. It's pretty cool.
Yeah, and then there's another one that we used to play with that was a shed, and it was kind of falling down. And that's because the Netherlands artists started painting a shed behind them, and actually they started painting a dilapidated temple, which represented the destruction of the old covenant that the Jewish law provided. Jesus has come, and the law is no more. And so, for some reason, Netherlands artists started picturing this as part of the nativity scene. So this shed that we see behind us that's simple and sometimes most often falling apart. I mean, I was looking at the nativity scene at this Christmas party, and the boards were lashed together and then nailed onto other things to keep them from falling off. Like, it was physically falling apart, which is not just because he was lowly of birth, right?
Right.
But because they're saying, he is here now, this structure that represents Jewish law is no longer needed and it will be destroyed. Which I find fascinating, because I always look at nativity scenes like this, and we're getting to the Magi in a second, but I always look at nativity scenes like this and say, that's inaccurate.
Right. Yeah, that he would be like a rickety stable. Yeah.
Yeah. And so, speaking about that being the inaccuracy, let's jump ahead to the 15th century. So about 1,000 years, I think. 5th century to the 15th century, is that 1,000 years?
Yeah.
Yeah. So in the 15th century, the wise men start to become more prominent. So we've seen them in the catacombs, we've seen them on the walls moving to Jesus, but they start to become part of the nativity scene more permanently for 2 reasons. Number 1, canvases are bigger. So art supplies have evolved, right? Okay. It would be kind of like saying we start to see the angels' wings moving because we now have iPads, right? Yeah. Like we're starting to see animated nativities because we have computers. Well, we're starting to see wise men in the 15th century because we have more room. Yeah. At the nativity scene, there's more room, and instead of painting everything bigger, we're going to add more people. And the second reason is that the wise men were better. You could draw them more colorfully, so they were easier to make into stained glass, because a shepherd usually wears very plain clothes. Mary and Joseph have their colors that represent them in religious art, but the wise men could be these pretty, and oftentimes there is just a single window in a church that's dedicated to the wise men themselves. Mm-hmm. I've noticed that in churches I've been in, and I didn't know why. But the Magi were the Gentile visitors, so they represented Jesus coming to all people. So when you see a nativity scene that has shepherds and wise men, it's not because it's historically inaccurate. Historically, the artist has chosen to show that Jesus has come to the people he was promised to, the Jews, the shepherds, who he was announced to, and to the wise men, the Gentiles, and he is available to all people of all races and all nations, to anyone who seeks him. And so it's not because the artist didn't know their history and they didn't read their Bible and they put him in a shed with the wise men and the shepherds at the same time, and a donkey and they put all these things in there on purpose to represent the law, the destruction of the law, the idolatry, the Gentiles, the Jews, the incarnate Christ. And I think that is really fascinating.
Yeah, I think that's honestly really challenging me to think about my own artwork and how many things am I doing intentionally? What things am I doing to reinforce the design of things that I create with not necessarily, it doesn't have to be iconographic symbolism, but it could be something like, what would that be? Is it either accurate to the time period or is it symbolic? What is it? What is the purpose of this? Because I think it's things that are in there that we don't know about. Like you said, I've seen churches with stained glass that just had a painted wise man, and I didn't. It impacted you, but you didn't know why, but it did make an impact. So I think that's an interesting thing to think about. Is like everything in your image will impact someone. Make it intentional.
Yeah. The church I'm thinking of specifically, Jesus and Mary and Joseph were the center picture. And then there were shepherds on the left window and wise men on the right window, and it was an entire nativity scene together. But speaking of using art intentionally, the only person that is actually a nativity artist, like the most recent person I could find, is Edward Burne-Jones, and I don't know who he is, but he is known to be nativity artist. So he had like sculptures, he had paintings, he had stained glass, he had some drawings, and so. But he's in the late 1800s, so there are no artists since then that I could find that are known for being nativity artists. So if someone out there knows of someone that is strictly a nativity artist, I'd love to know about them. I know of religious and non-religious artists that make nativity scenes as part of their, one of the projects that they do. But he was specifically a nativity artist, and then Saint Francis of Assisi is credited with creating the nativity scene. Okay. He used live people, actually, and animals to create an image, and I think he also did statues, and he was kind of the one that really brought it into popular culture. I'm trying to think, because of his influence, like he is so influential that there are nativity scenes all over the world. We talked about the prolificness of them even in our own lives. Yeah. I think it's really hard to go 10 feet without finding one at Christmas time in the United States, but even the Met in New York has a nativity scene every year because of how traditional the nativity scene is in art history.
Yeah, and that reminds me of a quote that someone said: "Is art is something that we didn't know we needed until we had it." And it's like they give the example of like Beethoven's symphony. Before there was a time when Beethoven's music did not exist in the world, but after it existed, now we can't imagine life without it. And that's almost how I'm beginning to think about nativity scenes. Like you're right, they're so common that without this sissy guy, he was pretty brave, I guess, even though they called him a sissy. But even without this guy, we wouldn't have something that now we just consider to be commonplace. And that's also super cool to think about as a creative person. Like, what can I create that could be considered such a part of humanity that they couldn't imagine life without it?
No, that's a great point. So I want to people kind of know what nativity scenes are, but I just kind of want to run through a couple here. There's obviously this one that is well known. This is a nativity scene. If we showed you this, you would say this is a nativity scene. There's this one that's a little bit, this is actually on my wife's, this is the one I mentioned earlier. It's in the living room. This is my wife's from childhood. This is the one that greets us when it comes in the door. It's very high art, very high church. And so this one's a little silly. Back when Coke was putting names on cans, someone put this together and even has one of the wise men's camels there. So I don't know what that's going on. And then this one's even sillier. As you can see, we have Darth Vader's here representing the Magi, and Hall & Oates representing the shepherds, and even Batman on the roof representing the angel. I don't know what my thoughts are on that. I necessarily would not portray this as serious nativity art, but
really portraying that he came to all kinds of people.
Yeah. So
Maybe.
I don't know, but now the one thing, I was researching these, and the Lord actually brought this to me because we were getting ready for this episode, and I opened Twitter, and this was the top of my timeline. Someone found minimalist nativity scenes, and so I of course downloaded all the pictures, and this one here is obviously the nativity scene. It's just these balls and the stable. This one is, I think, the laziest. It's just blocks of wood with Mary, baby Jesus written on them. This one I think could be misconstrued for a building set or some sort of toy block set that a child would play with.
Yeah.
But it's interesting in this one and the last one, and even this next one here. But this one is probably the fanciest. But in 3 of these 4, the stable has been represented, right? Mm-hmm. Like that stable still exists, and the wise men are still there, and the shepherds are still there, and I think there was even some animals in that first one. But just how, if you want to make a nativity scene, these are the things you need to include. And now you know, and now I know, and now our listeners know why we include these things. So I'd like to wrap up the episode by talking about living nativity scenes. So my third point here. Do you remember going to a living nativity scene at any point in your life? I know you went through a drive-through one recently, but I don't know if anyone was alive there.
No, everyone was dead. They had something had happened, and but I do remember I went through a drive-through nativity, I think, when I was young. I've been told by my older siblings that I did go to a one where we walked through and the people told us the story. I don't remember it personally, but I have been through that. And then I was in one. I was in a play in college called The Best Christmas Pageant Ever. It's a pretty popular Christian play. But I was a wise man. But I was it was about these kids who the church was kind of trying to witness to, so they put them in their Christmas pageant to try to share the story of Jesus with them. And I was one of the bad kids. I was always beating up on my little brother. But that was fun. So I was in a living nativity for a whole month of rehearsals, and then but yeah, that was super fun. But I have been at least to a drive-in living nativity that I remember.
Nice.
So
yeah, I am just going to say living nativities are my favorite thing. There's one that I can remember where we walked for a quarter of a mile through this church's property, different scenes of the nativity. They had camel there, they had a donkey there, they had a cow there, they had sheep there. They had all these farmers in their church that brought these animals, which was awesome. They actually had Mary ride past us on a donkey at one point, and then she would circle back around the church and do it for the next group, But I can remember one where it was all indoors, so there were fewer animals and more people. Hey, bud, Snickers? Speaking of animals, thank you. You had to insert yourself there. Fewer animals and more people. You were in the lobby to start, and that was the marketplace, and they actually would give you coins, and then the Romans would stop you and ask you for your taxes, or you could give them to people in the marketplace and get little trinkets and little Smarties and little candies and bread and stuff. All of them usually end with either the manger scene or they end in the auditorium usually, and the choir singing. And the last one I went to, you ended in the auditorium, and Mary and the baby were on the stage, and then Joseph was there. And there weren't any shepherds or anything, but there was a choir in the choir loft which had a curtain in front of it, and so they were singing I think Hallelujah, Gloria, in Excelsis Deo. And so my biggest thing is living nativities for me are my favorite because, first of all, they're a perfect thing for a church because a church has all kinds of personalities in it, and a nativity scene takes all kinds of personalities. You need Roman soldiers, you need shepherds, you need a Mary, you need an angel, you need a choir, you need someone to share the message, or you need guides, you need teachers, you need people behind the scenes. And so it's a great picture of a church coming together to put forward the message of Christ, in my opinion. And then secondly, I love living nativities because they're very moving for me personally because they're like a reset button. This is what we're celebrating, come to life. And I know it's a representation, and it's no one is there is Jesus, obviously, but it just helps me get me in that mindset, remind me this is Jesus Christ come in the flesh. The nativity is about that. And all of these symbols that we see come to life, and even they'll build a little stable or something, and they'll represent that law falling away. And what a beautiful thing it is that we don't have that law, and that he did come. He came and he lived among us. He was a child. He grew up. He went to the cross. He despised the shame. He bore the sin of our lives, everyone's lives, and then he rose again the third day and ascended to the throne, and he's coming back. And just seeing the beginning of that, just the very first moments in person, for what it's worth, I don't know, really does it for me.
Yeah, no, I think it's super cool. I've heard one person say recently that we get to look at these representations of the first coming and be in anticipation of his second coming, and like how, in contrast of how humble his first coming was, how magnificent and how glorious his second coming will be. So I agree. I think it's a great reminder.
Okay, well, you have any more questions about the Nativity? Because this is your last shot.
No, I don't think so. This dude did a ton of research on it, and it was awesome. So,
well, it was a blessing to me. I hope it was a blessing to our listeners. So thank you for asking me questions and putting up with me. As always, if you guys want to hear more interviews like we've been doing all year, or more episodes like this one, you can subscribe to us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, YouTube, Stitcher, and Spreaker. To follow along, and you can always connect with us on Instagram and Facebook, Destination Arete, Arete. Let us know what you thought of today's episode.
And if you enjoyed this week's episode, go ahead and share it with a friend that you think might enjoy it also.
Okay, wishing you all Merry Christmas from Destination Arete. We'll be back next week with a new episode for 2021. See you then. Yeah, that's a good point. I'm going to just run through just like types of nativity scenes. Oh, just a second. What are you doing?
What do you got?
His bone.
He's got his bone? You got your bone? Aw, yeah, good. He was sitting all funny.
I don't want you to crunch that right there. Can I have it? Can I have it? I actually really need you to go. Okay. Thanks, bud. All right, good boy. All right.